Hello and welcome to I think it's episode 9 of Planning Pundit with me, Linda Wright, your planning pundit. Now, the last episode, this one's a bit late and I'm really sorry about that. And I'm all bundled up because it's quite chilly. Been snow and all sorts of things. Last time I did episode 8 and I did class MA and full planning applications for external elevations. And I then realised that I hadn't actually done you an episode about class MA. So that's what I'm going to do with this episode. The episode immediately following this, which will be episode 10 of the Planning Pundit, will be all about use class E, because that's obviously what I'm going to talk about today. So let's start, shall we? General Permitted Development Order, GPDO, Class MA, is to convert a commercial, business or service use to dwelling houses. The planning legislation calls it dwelling houses. Read for that, flats. You could do houses if you wanted to, if the building suits, but it's probably flats in most cases. It is called permitted development. Now, as you know, if you've been listening to these things, this drives me nuts because it's not permitted development at all. You need the prior approval of the council. It's a hybrid. It's not a full planning application. It's not permitted development. It's somewhere kind of in between. So you can, as I've said, Class E, commercial, business and service uses. Now, I'm talking about use class E, not GPDO class. And I'm sorry if I'm insulting the people who know this, but there might be somebody out there who is scratching their head and going, class what? E, MA? Where have you getting all this stuff from? Right. So it's use class E, commercial, business and service. This was brought about in the new reforms of the use classes order. I will go through that in the next episode, episode 10. So it's Class E uses that can be converted using the prior approval system and getting prior approval from the council. They can be converted to dwelling houses, Class C3 dwelling houses. And this is in the General Permitted Development Order. So let's look at the first premise. What do you have to comply with in order to even get your application over the line for the council to look at it and say, do you know what? It complies with all of the criteria. Because if you don't comply with the criteria, the likelihood is the council will either, if they're on the ball, they'll throw it back at you straight away and refuse to register it. Or if they register and validate and all of that, and you end up several weeks, 56 days down the line, then you've just wasted 2 months of your life. And then they refuse it because it fails to comply. And I have seen both, either it being given straight back to you, sent straight back to you, and in which case they should refund any fee. But I've also seen the opposite of it going all the way down the line. And then the planner looks at it more closely and realizes, it doesn't comply. Then you get a refusal. Now, bit naughty, councils out there, darlings, bit naughty. If it doesn't comply with the criteria, tell them. Tell the applicant and get it back to them. So the first big criteria that you must comply with is size. Don't get me started now. So you cannot do this if the part of the building to be converted, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole building. It is very specific in the wording. It's the cumulative floor space, i.e. add them all together, of the existing building, changing use under Class MA. If it exceeds 1,500 square metres, you can't do it. You cannot use this procedure. You'd have to go for a full planning application. Now, again, as I've said, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole building. You can change a part of a building up to 1,500, 1,500 square metres and use this procedure. You're going to have to prove to the council that it isn't any more than 1,500 square metres. So That's what I call, it's not the first on the list, but it's what I call is something that you need to look at initially. So the building also must have fallen into one or more of the use classes specified, i.e. the former use classes that made up the now use class E, or they must have fallen within use class E for 2 years prior to the date of the application. So that's the second point. And the third point that I think is most important, there's all sorts of others. You're going to have to read this part of the GPO very, very carefully. Class M8, very, very carefully, if you want to make use of this procedure. And then the other issue is that it must have been vacant for at least 3 months immediately prior to the submission of a planning application. So if it hasn't been, if there have been tenants in there or the vendor has been, using it for something, then you are going to have to wait, because the council, most councils are getting a bit wise to these things now. They're going to ask you to prove, has it been vacant? Now, those are what I call the big three: size, 2 years fallen within that use class, and it needs to be vacant for at least 3 months. Those are the biggies. Now, but you've also got the issue of if it's within any kind of special protection area, and you can't do this in a listed building, obviously, and a scheduled ancient monument and all of that, and safety hazard, military explosives. If you've ever read bits of the GPDO, you'll know what this is. And it can't be if it's within an area of outstanding natural beauty, wildlife and countryside, the Broads National Park, all of this. I'm sort of paraphrasing now the legislation, and you don't even think about doing something on a World Heritage Site. So that crosses out a lot of these things. So what do you then have to do in order to submit your planning application? Well, your planning application, if it's going from Class E, use Class E, and you want to convert it to residential flats, houses, dwelling houses, under GPDO Class MA, you have to submit an application to the council, a prior approval application. Now, I know I bang on about this a bit, but prior approval does what it says on the tin. You cannot do this in retrospect. It just doesn't work. It has to be the prior approval of the council before you start any work. There's even a question on the form, last time I looked, that says, have you started work? So you need to put no in that box. If it's a yes, it's a so you have to, go back to go and start all over again. So the conditions upon which you can submit these applications, I cannot go through every single word and line of Class MA of the GPDO. You're going to have to do some of this yourself. You're going to have to do a bit of due diligence. But the matters on which the council can consider these types of application under Class MA are transport impacts of the development. So if there's no car parking provision and it's not within a sustainable location, then that potentially can have a transport impact of that development. And in particular with this Class MA, there needs to be safe site access. So that is a big one. It's a transport impact. That is A of this list. B, contamination risks in relation to the building. Now, a lot of buildings, if they've been there for a good number of years, this contamination risk is minimal, quite honestly, but it depends on the site. And you may find that a council knows something about the site, and you will have to get a report from an expert to confirm that contamination is not a risk on this site. Similarly, with the transport impacts, you may have to engage the services of a transport planner. Then we have flood risks in relation to the building that's to be converted. You cannot convert buildings where people are going to be sleeping and living their daily lives if there is a flood risk without some kind of, excuse me, assessment and possibly mitigation measures. So again, that is possibly going to need, probably if it's in a flood risk zone, going to need an expert report on flood risk. That might start to cost you a lot of money, so you need to be careful with these things. There's also the impact of noise. This is D of the list of criteria. Impacts of noise from commercial premises on the intended occupiers of the development of the property. And I've had one planning application refused on this basis, and it's now at appeal. So I'll possibly do another episode of the Planning Pundit to talk about that a little bit more, because be aware, this is not a rubber stamping job. Prior approvals by the council, it's not just, oh yeah, let them go. I know nobody rubber stamps paper drawings anymore. I'm that old, but what can I say? So noise from commercial premises outside on the intended residential occupiers. So you might need an acoustic report. If the building is located in a conservation area, you can do this in a conservation area, but if it's in a conservation area and you're changing the ground floor, you're changing the whole building, then the impact that the changes might have on the character and sustainability of the conservation area. Because if you're changing shop fronts in a conservation area and you're changing them to domestic scale, you know, front doors and domestic windows, that potentially could have an impact on the character of the conservation area. Now, there's no criteria for this. It will only be for the council to decide, and that's difficult to assess whether there's going to be a problem with this kind of thing. The next biggie is the provision of adequate natural light to all habitable rooms. You cannot mess with this. You may even have to get a daylight assessment done. And there are some councils, and in part of this requirement, you will have to provide sizes of windows to ensure that the flats that you're creating will have adequate levels of natural daylight. So please bear that in mind. Now, and one of the other criteria, if you're introducing a residential use and there's general or heavy industry, it's the impact on the intended occupiers that might have, either noise, dust, vibration, you know, just general smelliness. We don't know. But if you are doing this in a heavy industry area, that's what you might have to prove, that the future residents are not going to be disadvantaged. An odd one that came out that says if this is either a registered nursery or a health centre that's been maintained by the NHS, you have to look at the loss of those services and the impact that the loss of those services might have. Quite niche, that not many of these buildings are going to be in that form of use. And an application, well, we went well gone past this now. This was August, 1st of August 2021. All of you have to look at, there are cross references everywhere. The provisions of paragraph W of the general permitted development order apply. And that is where they set out what an application for prior approval should look like. And so you need to have a look at that as well. When you get your prior approval, if we're lucky and we get a prior approval, it lasts for 3 years from the date of the decision. And so you can put it in your back pocket and you can do it, or you can flip it and you can do it at a later date. Now, a lot of people argue with me about this. There is a specific condition in the GPDO Class MA that states any building to be, and I am going to read it out, any building to be permitted to be used as a dwelling house by virtue of this class is to remain in use as a dwelling house or flat within the meaning of Class C3 of the Use Classes Order. It is not intended to be used as serviced accommodation, holiday lets, whatever you want to call it. It is not intended to be converted to a C4 HMO. These properties that are created are to remain in Class C3 and for no other purpose. Now, I bet you didn't know that, did you? Well, maybe you did. Maybe you're very clever and very astute property developers and investors. So I'm going to leave it there. That is Class MA. If you are converting, if you want to convert an existing building that falls within or has fallen within for the previous 2 years, Class E, the new Class E business service commercial, then you can do this under the prior approval procedure. As I think you've heard, there are lots of hoops and barriers to this. You've got to, there's a lot of hoops to jump through before you even meet the criteria of a prior approval application. So please, this is just a heads up. There might be something in there that I've just missed. I doubt it, really, darlings, come on. But I haven't gone through this line by line, but I've given you the bullet points of what you need to be aware of before you even consider a Class MA. Now, finally, you need to be aware that Article 4 directions, it's like a dog is not just for Christmas. An Article 4 direction is not just for HMOs. There are some councils out there who disagree with central government having put forward these prior approval procedures and kind of relaxing of planning legislation. And what they have done is they have brought into force Article 4 directions to prevent the change of use of business class, Class E use buildings to be converted to residential. They tend to be mainly where they're trying to protect their central or business use in a certain area. But please be aware of this. You need to look at whether or not the council has an Article 4 direction that prevents the permitted development right. It makes me twitch. The prior approval right to convert these and submit a prior approval application. So again, just a heads up, just to let you know, you need to check all of these things. If you're not going to check all of these things, then planning consultants, architects, there are all sorts of agents out there, hopefully who know about these things and will help you with this. Other planning consultants are available, just saying. So that's me, Linda Wright, Planning Pundit, episode 9 of the Planning Punditry. And that was about Class MA. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this, if you think it might be useful to some of your colleagues, people, I post it on social media. Please like, share, subscribe. That's enough from me now. Linda Wright, Planning Pundit. See you next time.